I've worked as a school janitor for going on 12 years. In those 12 years, I've only worked at 2 high schools. This story is from about 10 years ago, when I began work at the first high school. It was a private school, and I was assigned the night shift. I would normally be the only one working in the building. On this particular night, it was 1 week before the school year started, so I had a lot of cleaning to do. It was tedious and annoying having to clean most of the classrooms myself. I should mention that since this was a private school, it couldn't afford any more janitors besides me and the daytime guy. At a minimum, the gym, cafeteria, nurse's office, and the administration department were all responsibilities of the daytime janitor. The school layout is shaped like a U, so there's really only one way around to the other side. It was around 1 in the morning when I was cleaning one of the language arts classrooms, when I happened to look outside. When I did, I saw that all the way on the other side of the school, the lights to one of the classrooms was turned on. It wasn't left on by accident. I know for a fact that I shut off all the lights to every classroom after I finished cleaning. Someone else was in the building with me. A dark figure then approached the window. When I got closer, I saw it was a man. He stared right at me, and I saw a creepy smile form on his face as he waved. Remembering that disturbing smile still gives me the chills to this day. From my vantage point, he looked to be in his 50s. He had very messy black hair, and his face was covered by a beard. I closed the blinds and tried to think about my situation. Should I go confront him or run away and call 911? When I rolled the blinds up again, I saw the lights to the classroom were now turned off. There was nothing but darkness on that side of the school now. That sent me into panic mode. It was now a game of cat and mouse inside this closed-down building. Every sound I heard felt deliberate. The creepy smile kept replaying in my mind. It was almost like the intruder had been waiting for me. Paranoia grew with each passing second. The option to run seemed like the best. I stepped out into the hallway, but this time, I had no choice but to navigate the building with the lights off, which would be difficult. As I maneuvered my way through the dark hallways, I heard footsteps behind me. He was surely on his way to the classroom that I had been cleaning when I saw him. I knew I probably didn't have enough time to get to the stairs, so I unlocked the nearest classroom door and quietly shut it. I didn't lock it for fear of making more noise. Once I heard the footsteps fade down the hall, I hid behind a desk in the far corner of the classroom. I was able to see the door from my hiding spot. The footsteps were now coming back down the hallway, only this time, they were accompanied by another sound. Doorknobs turning. A couple of steps, doorknob turning. A couple more steps, doorknob turning. The intruder was doubling back and was now checking each door. I instantly regretted not locking the classroom door when I had the chance. Now, he would surely know I was in there. Once he got to the door and was able to open it, the steps grew closer and closer, going from classroom to classroom until they were right outside. They then stopped. I kept my head down. When I looked up again, my stomach sank. There, staring into the classroom from the door's window, was the intruder. He was looking in my direction, and I couldn't tell if he could see me in the dark, but I immediately ducked back down. What happened next was probably the scariest thing that has ever happened in my life. The door creaked open, and I could hear him entering the classroom. I covered my mouth so he couldn't hear my breathing. The steps seemed to be pacing back and forth before they stopped. I thought about looking up to see if the coast was clear, but I wasn't going to risk giving away my hiding spot. After what felt like a lifetime, I heard the door open again and the steps leaving the room. They continued down the hall before fading away. I quietly exited the classroom, back into the hallway, went down the stairs, then exited the school through the back door. I called the police and then my supervisor. I waited in the parking lot for the cops to show up, and then another 30 minutes for them to check the building. Of course, nothing was found. The next day, the security footage was examined. It showed the man appearing from the basement, and then wandering around the school. However, the last thing the footage showed was the intruder going back into the basement. He never came back up, which makes me wonder if he escaped through a hidden tunnel somewhere down there, or perhaps maybe he lived there. But the basement was checked, and nothing was found. I would continue to work at that school for about 2 more weeks. During this time, I was extremely paranoid. Maybe I would see that man's face peering around the corner of a hallway, or sneaking up behind me. On the very last shift of me working there, I would hear strange noises coming from down the hallway, or whenever I happened to be near the basement. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave that school, knowing that someone or something might be in the building with me. Soon after, I got a job at a different school, where I continued working as a janitor. I still think about that night to this day, and who that man was, and sometimes, when I lie down and close my eyes, I find myself back in that school, hiding or being chased by an unwelcomed guest. I live in Glasgow, Scotland. This incident happened when I was 18, back in 2011. This event forever shattered my trust in authority and made me realize that sometimes those who are supposed to protect us can't be trusted, and those who are considered low-life criminals can actually be the good guys in some circumstances. One night my friend Jess and I were coming back from dinner, and we were walking through a forested area. During the walk, we saw our neighbor Jerry. Jerry was the type of guy most people avoided. He's basically a local drug dealer, and has been in and out of prison since he was 18. As we passed him, he told us that 2 young women shouldn't be out so late. What he said unsettled us because of his reputation, although Jerry had never been aggressive toward us in any way, so we kept moving. Just before we entered our neighborhood, we were stopped by 2 police officers, and they began questioning us. They asked to check our bags, and we didn't think too much of it at first. Then the situation took an alarming turn. One of the officers produced a large bag of cocaine that he claimed to have found in Jess's bag. We were then both placed in handcuffs. At this point, I was terrified. Instead of going to the police car, we were walked down another forest path and then taken to an abandoned office building. You can use your imagination for what happened next. It was horrible, and something that has permanently scarred the both of us. Afterwards, one of the officers called someone. "We got 2 fresh ones here. Could be worth something." This is where panic set in. These policemen were a part of some kind of trafficking operation. I thought me and Jess were going to be forced into slavery, and we'd be featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries someday. We were left sitting on the floor, while one of the officers went outside. After about 30 minutes, the officer that remained with us began to get uneasy. He was probably wondering why his partner hadn't come back yet. Suddenly, Jerry stormed into the building. He charged the officer. There was a struggle. If you're wondering why Jerry wasn't shot, here in Scotland, the police are usually not armed. Jerry overpowered the policeman and slammed his face into a table, knocking him out. He then helped us out of our cuffs from a key he had taken, and we got the hell out of there. Although Jerry insisted we didn't call the police, we were terrified. and wanted to make sure something was done about this. Now you might be thinking that these men weren't real police officers, but this wasn't the case. They were both real policemen who used their positions to kidnap women for human trafficking. The aftermath was very disappointing. The cops were arrested. One of them actually took his own life in his jail cell, and the other pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. I followed up on the case when I was a bit older. The officer did not give up his human trafficking connections, possibly due to what could happen to his family if he did. While the case was ongoing, me and Jess were visited by the local police at our homes. They told us that we could face charges if we talked to the press or anyone else, because apparently this was an ongoing case. It's only in hindsight that I understood the depths of corruption we were involved in. This may sound a bit conspiratorial, but I believe our entire local police department was a pipeline for human trafficking. They threatened us into silence because they didn't want us to speak to anyone about the case. 2011 was not that long ago, but it was a different time. With the exception of a few local news articles, which can no longer be found, there was no real media coverage about what happened. Some people we knew even accused us of making up the entire thing, and some people even believed that Jerry had done something to us, and we were intimidated by him into blaming the police. On paper, Jerry is a violent criminal with a history of drug-related offenses and is considered an overall scumbag. However, it was him who saved us from a horrifying fate. And the people who were supposed to uphold the law were the ones who hurt us. Jess and I have lived relatively normal lives after this, but we avoided going anywhere secluded after dark, and both of us still don't trust the police at all. Jerry eventually went back to prison for an unrelated offense, and he was nowhere to be found during the criminal trial of the officer. I don't know what happened to him. The reason I'm sharing this is because the recent incident where that poor girl in England who was assaulted and murdered by a police officer made my blood turn cold. If you're anywhere in the world and something feels wrong, even with an authority figure, you should trust your gut. Record everything. Because I know that some people aren't as lucky as Jess and I. Hey there, Uncle Unit. I'm a big fan of your channel. Been listening for a couple years now, and your videos along with the true crime podcasts I listen to make the long hauls across country a little more bearable. There was a story in one of your recent videos about a woman who was attacked on her prom night. A man wearing a rain poncho came at her with a knife while she was in the restroom, and it reminded me of this experience I had on the road back in 2002. And those times, I was running hauls out of Dallas down to Houston and then back up through the Panhandle. I've been driving semi since I was in my early 20s. I figured I knew every stretch of I-35, every rest area, every way station like the back of my hand. You get into a rhythm out there. CB chatter, coffee from the truck stops, watching the miles tick by under the open Texas skies, bugs on the windshield, maybe the occasional blowout, but not much else. That night I was southbound on US 281, somewhere between Wichita Falls and Abilene. The only thing out that way is shrub bush and oil pumps. Around 2 a.m., my rig was heavy enough that the scales were calling me in at this little way station off the highway. It was basically just a concrete pad with a scale house, with one sleepy attendant inside. I pulled up, weighed in quick, no ticket, just the usual paperwork. Then I was waved through. I needed to hit the head real quick, too much coffee, so I parked my rig in the pull-through, killed the engine, and walked over to the restrooms. The place was dead quiet, except for the crickets and the weeds. The door creaked open. Call me crazy, but something didn't feel right about this place, and it wasn't just the smell of bleach and old piss. I felt like I wasn't alone in there. The only other time I've felt this way was when I had my first encounter with a lot lizard. Look that up if you don't know. I stepped up to the urinal and started doing my business. That's when I heard it. Soft click of the latch behind me. One of the stall doors started opening, very slowly, like whoever was in there didn't want me to notice right away. I glanced over my shoulder to see the stall door ajar. I finished and zipped back up. When I turned around, I saw someone inside the stall, peering out at me. "What's your problem?" The stall door then opened fully, and out stepped a man wearing a black hoodie pulled down low, hiding most of his face. In his hands, he held an axe. It was one of those full-sized red fire axes. He then raised it over his head and charged at me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My instincts took over, and I bolted for the door, almost tripping over my own boots. I burst outside and headed straight for the scale house. The attendant must have saw me approaching, because he came out before I even got there. "What the hell?" he shouted. I pointed back at the restroom. "In there, there's some fucking lunatic with an axe. Are you fucking with me? Because they'll revoke your CDL if this is a joke." "No, I'm not fucking with you, asshole. Go call the police." The attendant called it in and offered me a chair. I made sure to apologize for calling him an asshole after he got off the phone. The state troopers rolled up quick, lights flashing. They searched the entire station and the brush off the highway. They even checked under my trailer, like the guy might have been hiding there. They found nothing. My attacker vanished like smoke. There were no surveillance cameras at this location, but there was drug paraphernalia found in the bathroom stall he came out of. The troopers took my statement, said that they would look into local transients, but out there, in rural Texas, middle of nowhere, good luck. I sat in my cab until dawn, engine running, doors locked, shaking. I kept replaying it over and over in my head. This guy was doing drugs in the bathroom stall, and he attacked me with an axe when he heard me come in. If that guy working at the scale house had come in and wasn't paying attention, he might have had that axe get buried into his head. I never heard another word from the troopers, so I assume they never caught the guy. I've seen a lot of shit on the road over the years, been in arguments with hitchhikers. I've never picked one up, but sometimes they just like to invite themselves into the cab. I've seen 18-wheelers flip over, and have even had my truck buried in an avalanche in Colorado. But nothing puts the fear in you like seeing some deranged hooded man coming after you with an axe. To this day, I try to avoid going to way station restrooms alone at night if possible. If it's a simple drain, I just find the nearest bush. But if I have to take the Browns to the Super Bowl, I have no choice. In 1993, I was working for a truck rental company. Think U-Haul, but local to Georgia. We only had 3 locations: Griffin, Atlanta, and Savannah. I would often have to move box trucks from one location to another. Easy money, short runs, home most nights. That particular evening, I had to take a 24-foot box truck from the Griffin location up to the Atlanta depot. My boss told me, "You should take the back roads to avoid traffic. We're on a time crunch with this one." According to traffic reports, there was something going on in the city that night that caused the interstates to be backed up. The truck was assigned to be rented out the very next morning, which was unusual. But I remember that things were a bit hectic around this time because we were competing with the corporate chains that were looking to set up shop in our territories. We fought the good fight, but ended up being absorbed by 1999. Anyways, it was late fall, already dark by 7 p.m. I got turned around somewhere off of GA 155. The roads became all twisty, no street lights, thick pines on both sides. I pulled over on the gravel next to a big stretch of woods to check the maps. This was long before the GPS smartphone days. As I was examining the map, something hit the hood of the truck like a gunshot. I jumped and looked out. I saw nothing at first. Then a brick sailed right through the passenger window, glass exploding inward, showering me. I looked up again. There was someone in the trees, maybe about 20 feet off the road, wearing a white porcelain mask, like those theater masks, but with no expression. He didn't say a word, and he had another brick ready to go, and cocked back his arm for another throw. As I put the truck back in the drive, a second masked figure appeared outside the broken window, hanging off the truck's frame. I floored it, tires spinning. As the truck went forward, the masked man tried opening the passenger door. I turned hard, going back in the opposite direction. The masked man yelled as I sent him tumbling into a ditch. I gunned it back down the way I came, taking another look into my rearview mirror one last time. There were now several figures standing in the road, 4, maybe 5, shoulder to shoulder, like statues, watching as I sped away. I didn't stop until I made it back to the highway, pulled into the first gas station I came across, glass crunching under my boots when I got out to talk to the clerk about calling the police. I told them everything, the masks, the brick being thrown, which was still in my cab, and the one who tried opening the door while I was speeding off. They sent units out, but of course, by the time they got back to that stretch of road, there was nothing there. Those woods were too thick to search at night. The cops took my report and said it sounded like kids playing a prank, or maybe a robbery setup gone wrong. That could be accurate for all I know, but something tells me there was something else going on out there. Multiple people wearing those blank porcelain masks. It felt coordinated, like they were waiting for someone to pull over. My boss was pissed about the damage to the truck, but was glad I was okay. I always wondered if it was some kind of cult back in those woods. Georgia had weird groups like that in the 90s, with satanic rituals and whatnot. Maybe they saw my headlights and decided that I was the offering for that night. Or maybe it was just bored locals messing with drivers. Either way, I never took the back roads again after that. And if I ever got turned around somewhere, I would pull over at a well-lit gas station or a truck stop to study the maps or ask for directions. I've been driving trucks for around 30 years. I've been all over the road since the late 90s, running Midwest routes mostly, Chicago to Detroit, Indy to Cleveland. You get the idea. These areas are mostly long, boring highways. I have the same routine every stop. Weigh in if needed, grab some food, check the tires, then hit the road. Nothing fancy, nothing scary. But one night around 2005, the routine was disrupted. I was somewhere off I-94 near Jackson, Michigan, hauling auto parts northbound. It was around 8 p.m. My stomach was growling after a long day on the road. I pulled into this little truck stop outside of Jackson. There was a couple of other rigs parked. I fueled up, weighed in, then parked in the back lot near the diner. I always make sure to lock the cab whenever I leave. I walked in the diner for a hot plate and a cup of coffee. The place was half empty. The waitress was chatting with some regulars. I just sat at the counter, checking my route maps. GPS wasn't fully integrated at this time, and I would say I was in there for around 45 minutes. I walked back out, unlocked my door, climbed in, and fired up the engine. Everything seemed normal. Sleeper curtain was half drawn like I had left it, and I eased out of the lot, merging onto the highway ramp, and got up to speed. I was about half a mile down the road when blue lights were flashing in my mirrors. A state trooper pulled me over. I had no idea why. I wasn't speeding, and my lights were good. I eased to the shoulder and killed the engine. The trooper walks up, flashlight in hand. "Good evening, sir. Is there someone with you?" I was confused by the question. No, officer. It's just me." That's when I heard it. From directly behind me, a soft whisper, female voice, raspy and low. "Don't tell him I'm back here." I froze. My heart drops to my stomach, and my skin goes cold. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing was visible with a curtain, but I knew someone was back there. I didn't say a word at first. I just stared straight ahead, and the trooper notices my face change. "Is everything all right?" "No, there's someone right behind me." He steps back with one hand on his holster. "Okay, I need you to step down from the vehicle." I open the door and climb down. The trooper draws his sidearm and points it at the cab. "Whoever is in there, come out slowly, hands where I can see him." The curtain parts, and a woman climbs out. She was in her mid-30s, stringy hair, track marks on her arms. She came out with her hands up, eyes wide. She looked like your typical homeless drug addict, thin, jittery. I'm surprised I didn't smell anything while I was in there. The trooper cuffs her right there on the shoulder and radios it in. I'm standing off to the side, staring at my own truck like it's a stranger. They search her. No weapon, just a small bag with some clothes and a meth pipe, of course. She doesn't say much, mumbles something about being cold and needing a ride. The trooper asked her how she got in, and she shrugs. "The door was unlocked." But that was a lie. Someone saw her messing with the passenger side door while I was inside the diner. She slipped in and hid in the sleeper compartment. Thankfully for me, whoever saw her called the police. They took her away in the cruiser. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from a detective following up on the case. It turns out she was wanted for questioning in connection to a homicide that happened down in Jackson. Some guy was stabbed in a motel room a few days earlier. Her prints were found at the scene. She wasn't charged with a murder, but they were holding her because she knew something about what happened. She had a history, priors for theft, drugs, and prostitution, nothing violent. After the call, I sat in my motel room, staring up at the ceiling. She was right behind me the whole drive from the lot. She could have done anything. Grabbed the wheel, put a knife to my throat, anything, and I wouldn't have been able to stop it. Moving forward, I always checked the cab after every stop, opening the sleeper curtain, shining a light in the back, under the bunk, behind the seats, even if my cab was locked, and even if it's daytime. No exceptions. What I experienced in the summer of 2012 is something that has changed my life forever. When I was 17, I spent my last summer living in my quiet town in Nova Scotia, right on the Mirror River. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, and while I loved living there, the lack of career opportunities meant that I would have to move elsewhere once I finished up high school. That August, I would be heading to Toronto to begin college on a scholarship. I remember that it was a Friday, and I had skipped school that day so I could help my dad set up the backyard for a barbecue we were going to have in the evening. While setting up some tables, I spotted a large black bag in the river, which ran behind our house. It was half submerged, caught against some branches near the bank. When I got closer, I saw that it was a hockey equipment bag, which struck me as odd. No one just throws away a perfectly good hockey bag around here. So I told my dad about it, and when he saw it for himself, he went to go grab a pike pole in the garage. When he came back out, we dragged it onto the shore. It was much heavier than expected. When we finally unhooked it, I noticed a horrible stench, the kind that makes your stomach turn instantly. At first, I thought perhaps someone had hit a dog on the road, stuffed it into this bag, and threw it into the river, which would have been horrible enough on its own. But curiosity got the better of us, and my dad unzipped the top just a few inches to see what was inside. We could see what looked like black plastic and hair. human hair. My dad immediately zipped it back up, told me to go back inside and call the police. What the police discovered inside the bag would shock our entire community. The bag contained the remains of a 21-year-old woman named Laura Jessam. The case made national headlines. Since this was over 10 years ago, I'll be sure to provide some links to a couple of articles. Laura Jessam was strangled to death inside of an apartment in Glace Bay, where she had been doing drugs with 3 men, Morgan McNeil, Thomas Barrett, and Robert Matheson, who were charged in connection with the murder. There seems to be several versions of what exactly took place inside that apartment, mainly due to the suspects turning on each other. What is known for sure is that Jessam arrived there that day to do drugs. An altercation occurred at some point, and she was strangled to death, and her body was stuffed into a bag and dumped in the Mira River. My dad and I were the ones who eventually discovered that hockey bag she was placed in and informed the police right away. Even now, more than a decade later, I still won't fish, swim, or even go near that stretch of river whenever I go visit my parents. Some places just feel permanently stained. In your last video, you had a story that took place in Peru, and it reminded me of my experience in the neighboring country of Ecuador. In the early 2000s, I had just gotten my degree, and I was looking to take a vacation before I started job hunting. My idea of a good time is seclusion. To this day, I'm an avid hiker who enjoys traveling to remote locations in the United States, Canada, and South America. A friend of mine suggested that Ecuador had some scenic hiking trails and that tourism there is extremely low because of the country's severe instability. I never minded a little danger, and the less tourists, the better. They always ruin the atmosphere for me. Despite how Caucasian-sounding my name is, I'm actually half Mexican on my mother's side, and I speak fluent Spanish. The point being, I could blend in easily. A day after landing in Guayaquil, I was deep in the Cerro Blanco forest, miles from anywhere. The canopy was so thick, it felt like evening time, despite it being in the middle of the day. I came to this location specifically to capture a photo of what they call the cloud forest, where trees become shrouded by low-hanging clouds, which creates a sort of localized fog area. But during my hike, I came across something very out of place. A white box truck, parked right in the middle of the forest. There was no road, no clearing, just trees all around it. I thought maybe the truck had broken down and was abandoned, but the truck looked like it was in good shape. I found it odd, but I wasn't looking for trouble, so I kept moving. That's when the first arrow flew right past my head, missing me by inches. Before I could even process what was happening, another arrow struck me in the shoulder. The pain was instant and burning. I ran as more arrows were shot in my direction. I came upon an area of tall bushes and dropped to the ground behind one of them, trying to make myself as small as possible. While I was hiding there, bleeding and trying not to make a sound, I saw a camouflaged figure emerge from the trees about 30 yards away, holding a crossbow. He moved slowly, scanning the area. He was clearly hunting for me. After what felt like forever, he finally disappeared back into the foliage. I soon heard the box truck start up and drive away. I stayed hidden for another 30 minutes. I knew not to remove the arrow, but I was still losing blood, and I had to get moving. I made my way back toward the parking area as fast as I could. When I finally reached the lot, I was exhausted and collapsed. Fortunately for me, several bystanders were there to help me. The police were called, and I was rushed to a hospital. A detective later came to speak with me when I was feeling better. He told me the box truck I saw was almost certainly being used by drug traffickers. The deep canopy of the Ecuadorian forests made perfect mobile staging points for moving narcotics. The man who shot me was probably guarding that shipment. It was in a remote location, but since it was near a hiking trail, the attacker may not have wanted to make too much noise, which is likely why they used a crossbow. I eventually made a full recovery and returned home as soon as I was able to. This happened in 2002. Since then, Ecuador has made a lot of progress and is a much safer place to visit now, but I have never returned there after that. There were a few articles written about what happened to me, but I can't seem to find any of them on Google. Over 20 years have passed, and I still go hiking whenever I can, and I always bring a handgun with me, if where I'm going allows it. It was around 2005 that I had to take a long hiatus, because that's when I met my wife and started a family. It wasn't until around 2018 that I started taking sporadic trips again. There was a while where I'd find myself looking at photos of my wife and kids, and a haunting thought would creep into the back of my mind. If that arrow had just been a few inches more to the left, I never would have met my wife, and my kids would have never been born. I likely would have disappeared forever. I'm submitting this story under a pen name because it's part of a book I'm currently writing that examines cults and fringe groups that have operated in the northeastern United States over the past several decades. What ultimately inspired me to pursue this project was a disturbing personal encounter I experienced back in 1996. This happened right after my divorce. It was a very rough time in my life. I was exhausted, stressed out, and needed to get away from everything. I rented out a small cabin deep in the forests of Vermont so I could work on my first novel in solitude. I had never been to Vermont before this. I'm from the West Coast. I chose it randomly because at the time I was paranoid that my ex-husband would follow me. Things did not end well between us, so I reasoned that Vermont would be the last place he would ever go looking for me. The cabin was beautiful, surrounded by a thick forest, with no neighbors for miles. At first, it felt like exactly what I needed. But after a couple of days, I started hearing strange noises at night, scratching sounds on the roof, footsteps on the front porch, and I thought I even heard voices whispering outside at one point. Given what I was going through at the time, this set me on edge. It wasn't just at night either. When I would go outside during the day, I got this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I told myself it was just my paranoia from the divorce, and I wasn't exactly used to being alone in the woods. This went on for a few more days. I never encountered anyone though, so I figured that perhaps my mind was just playing tricks on me. One night, I woke up to a loud banging on my bedroom window. There was no way to rationalize it this time. There was someone outside the cabin. I sat up, heart racing, and looked to the window, which had the curtain drawn. Another loud pounding came, causing me to jump. "Who's there? Do you have any idea what time it is?" No one answered. After maybe 5 minutes of hearing nothing, I peeked out the window. The woods were dark and still. There was no one in sight. The thought had occurred to me that I experienced some kind of night terror, but just to be sure, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the front door. Once I saw there was no one on the front porch, I opened it carefully, then shined the light into the yard. That's when I saw them. There were maybe 10 men total, standing silently in the front yard and among the trees. All of them were wearing black hoods that covered their faces. In fact, that was the only thing any of them were wearing. They just stood there, like statues, staring at the cabin. I'm not sure if I screamed or yelled something at them, but it wasn't long after that they all began to pleasure themselves. I was disgusted beyond words, but then I suddenly became more terrified than I ever have been in my whole life. Those freaks outside could easily force their way into the cabin. I was alone and defenseless. I slammed the door and locked it, then immediately retreated into the bedroom. I pushed a wooden wardrobe in front of the window before praying to God that the landline next to the bed was still working. Thankfully it was, but I was shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. By the time the officers arrived 15 minutes later, the men were gone. The police took my statement and then told me something that made my blood turn to ice. They had apparently received several reports from other women in the area who had either rented cabins like me or lived in remote locations. It was the same thing. Several naked men wearing black hoods standing in the nearby woods, never trying to break in or attack. The officer told me he was only aware of one other instance where someone witnessed them masturbating. The police were never able to catch them. They took the report seriously, but it was unpredictable where they would show up next, even with increased patrols. They theorized this was some kind of bizarre cult ritual. They would make sure the women were alone, possibly scouting locations before moving in. Although they never seemed to attack or break in, it was like they wanted to make sure the women saw them. Most of the time, things wouldn't go according to plan. The women either wouldn't answer the door, or a neighbor would see them and start yelling. Either way, the men would disappear back into the forest before the police could arrive. I left the cabin the next morning and never went back, and spent my remaining time in Vermont in a hotel room in Burlington. After this incident, I've done extensive research into this topic over the years. Vermont is a very small, rural state. It does have a history of cult activity. There's also a local urban legend often dubbed the Men in Suits. During the 1990s, there were numerous reports emerging from isolated areas describing well-dressed men appearing in locations where they clearly did not belong, such as dense forests or isolated back roads. I guess you could title my experience the Men in Birthday Suits. As I mentioned at the beginning, I do plan on getting the full story published someday, but in the meantime, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts.
There's always a reason.